Everyone, in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to use the selection tools in Photoshop. Let's first start by finding the selection tools. They can be found on the toolbar, which is on the left hand side of your workspace. The selection tools are the second, third, and fourth tool on the toolbar. We've got here the marquee tools. Remember that there are any tools that have this arrow at the bottom right hand corner mean it has tools that are nested together. There are more underneath, so just click and hold to find them. We've got marquee tools, lasso tools, and then a couple other selection tools. All right, speaking of selection tools, this one in particular, object selection. This is an AI controlled tool that will freeze your Photoshop and device. So let's get rid of that on the toolbar so that it doesn't mess with us. We don't want to accidentally click it at any point. So we're going to go up to edit together and down till you see toolbar. All right, we're going to find the object selection tool on the left hand side and move it over to this extra tools space and press done. That's going to make sure it's no longer on the toolbar so we don't have any worries. All right. As far as the selection tools practice worksheet, this can be found in Teams. Make sure to download it and then open it up here in Photoshop. I'm going to zoom in for the directions, Control+, and the directions tell us to precisely select each object using the corresponding selection tool. So notice we have an object and then a selection tool to use. Use the move tool to move that tool to the empty blue box or move that object, and then deselect before starting a new selection and repeat those steps until you've finished all 6. Okay, great, let's get started. So we're going to start with the rectangular marquee tool, which is here. Remember that this is a tool that makes a selection in the shape of a rectangle, and basically it just works by click, holding, and dragging. And again, you're always going to make a better, more precise selection by zooming in. If you're far away, you make accidents. All right, I want to line up the corner with that little dot in the center of my cursor. Click, hold, and drag to make a rectangle. If I wanted to make a square, I would hold down Shift, but this item is rectangular. Perfect. All right, easy as that. Let's go ahead and move it over with the move tool. Click, hold, and drag right into that blue box. Great. Before we go on to the next one, we're going to deselect, Control D, and then we can move on. So now we want to use the lasso tool. So here is our lasso tools. This lasso tool makes freehand selections, but remember it's not very precise. So we're going to do the best we can. We should still be able to make a pretty good selection here. So make sure that you take a look at your options bar. We want to be on either new selection or add to selection. I'm going to go ahead and start on new selection. Now I'm going to click, hold, and basically slowly drag my cursor around the object. Again, you can see it doesn't make very precise selections, but we can always go back and fix some of these details. And then once we get back to where we started, we can let go. And now you'll see that we have our selection, but it's not perfect. So let's go and add in some of the areas we missed. Let's go up to our options bar though and make sure we switch on to add to selection. Now when we're adding on, make sure that wherever you start, that you go back to that starting point before you let go. I'm gonna do that over here as well. Let's go back to where we started and let go, and same thing down here. All right, now again, this tool's not meant to be precise, but when working in smaller sections, you can be much more precise. All right, that looks great. I'm gonna fix the top here. And then we actually want to get rid of the inside of this handle. That's technically the background. So I'm going to go up to my options bar again, this time subtract from selection, and make a selection of the inside of the handle. All right, I'm going to continue that because I didn't do a great job. And go back to where I started. And that's not a bad selection. Let's zoom out, move tool, and move over our mug. We're going to deselect, Control D, and then move on to our polygonal lasso tool. Now this tool makes selections based on straight lines and can be found underneath the regular lasso tool. All right, so essentially you just click to make a starting point and then can drag around your cursor and go in different directions. All right, I'm going to zoom in again here just so you can see. Now notice the arrow on my cursor. I want to line that up with the edge of the object and click once. Notice that as I drag the cursor around, it will keep being a straight line, but I can go in any direction I please. And at every corner, I'm going to make a click. This will make an anchor point, which will allow us to continue to move. I'm going to zoom out a little bit as we keep going. All right, now this works really good for straight edge stuff. If you have curved edges, you can make multiple anchor points. So every time I change direction, I'm just clicking once. Click, click. I'm doing almost every corner, but some of these corners are a little bit rounded, so I'm going to make a few extra anchor points. There we go. And I'm going to continue to do this until I get back to where I started. I could also double click whenever I'm done, and that will make my selection. All right, that looks pretty good. I'm going to zoom out, move tool, and move it over. Let's deselect, Control D, and move on to the magnetic lasso. All right, the magnetic lasso can be found underneath the polygonal lasso tool. And this tool works by basically you drag it around and it will snap to the edges because it can identify different colors and shapes. So just like with the magnetic lasso tool, we want to give this a starting point. So I'm going to line up my arrow with an edge of the object, click. Now I'm not holding, but I'm just now going to drag. Notice that it's making these anchor points once it can find the edges of my object. Now as I get to this area where it has shadow, it's going to struggle maybe a little bit to make a precise selection. See what it did there? We can always go back and fix that. You can also make anchor points yourself. So anytime I click, I can make some of those anchor points. All right, now with this tool, it really is just slow and steady. The slower you go, the more precise, and works really well with objects that have curved edges. Alrighty. Now you can zoom in and out like I did, but if you're ever zoomed in like this and need to move, you can always hold down the space bar and you can click and drag and move around, and that won't mess up your selection. When you let go of the space bar, you can continue with your selection. All right. Once I get back to where I started, I can click. There we go. All right, that actually did really good. But I want to make sure that I'm subtracting these areas where I see the background. So make sure that you have subtract ready to go. And we're going to get rid of these areas here in the middle. All right, make sure you always go back to where you started and have that selection going. Okay, here's that area we missed before. Let's go to add to selection. We'll start here, but because it's having a difficult time, I'm going to make my own anchor points by clicking. And then remember, we want to go back to where we started. And that looks pretty good. Let's zoom out and move. All right, our next one, deselect, is asking us to use the quick selection tool, which is my favorite of the selection tools. Like the name, I find it to be really quick. So here it is here. And it basically allows you to click or paint, and Photoshop will determine the edges, just like it does with that magnetic lasso tool. I'm going to make sure that I'm on add to selection. Now this is a tool where you are using essentially a paintbrush as a selection tool, and you can make the size of the brush larger. And in order to do that, you have an option up in the option bar here with size. I like the keyboard shortcut, which is the bracket tools, which will allow you, the right bracket tool will make it bigger, the left one will make it smaller. All right, if you do adjust the size, which you should, you always want to make sure that the brush size is smaller than the object you are choosing. If I make the brush bigger, it will always select more than what I wanted to select. So let's deselect, make the brush smaller, and then I can click. Now, even with one click, this did a great job. If it doesn't do that good of a job, you can always click and hold, or click in multiple areas, and Photoshop will do its best to determine the object. Now that actually made a beautiful selection. Notice how quick that was. Let's go to move and move that over. And we're going to finish with the last one, which is our magic wand. So let's deselect, switch to our magic wand tool. Remember now this tool allows us to select based on color, but it's very important that we check the tolerance at the top. All right, remember that the higher your tolerance, the more colors it will select, more similar colors. If your tolerance is very low, it will only select that very specific color. So even though that these scissors are all red, there's many different values of red within this image. So if I set this to 0 and I go to select, and I can either click and hold and drag, notice that it's not selecting much because I'm really only allowing it to select one color. If I change this to 100 and now I click, it's going to do a lot better in that it's going to select more colors that are similar. And any of those spots that are missed, I can go back in and click them. So like, of course it didn't select the yellow, but now if I select the yellow, it will. All right, anywhere that you see some of those marching ants inside of your object, just click. All right, make sure that you don't click inside of the handles. We don't want those to be selected. And let's move it over and deselect. All right, and that's it. Let's go ahead and save. Now, usually we always save as a Photoshop file, but because we are not using multiple layers in this assignment, we are just going to export our final image as a JPEG. So let's do that by going to File, down to Export, and then Export As, just like we do in Lightroom. All right, we want to make sure that your format is JPG, JPEG. Otherwise, go ahead and go on the bottom, click Export. Your computer is going to ask you where you want to save. Make sure that you save onto your computer, and then I suggest that you save into your OneDrive. This will make sure that it still saves to the cloud so that none of your work gets lost. It'd be really helpful if you save into a folder for our class. Let's add our first and last name before the assignment name with a dash and click Save. All right, and you're all done. Go turn it in.